these are incredibly misleading because,
Mhm.
you can't just assume that your function is going to come simply from this blueprint. When we overfocus on, oh gosh, I'm heterozygous or I'm homozygous positive or 677C, people get so hung up. They completely forget that they can eat food. Or, if they're pregnant or trying to conceive, for some reason, the population of people and practitioners who are some practitioners and many of the influencers, depending on what people are trying to sell ideologically and product wise, they will often be the same people who are viciously opposed to any form of prenatal vitamins. So these people are often part of the desiccated liver sect.
Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing. Hi, and welcome to Influence to Death. My name is Victoria Lafont, and I am here today. We have a guest co-host. Amanda Jones is here for Amanda. Amanda, you were the one that didn't get much sleep last night, but me either, actually. But I don't have a little baby as an excuse, but I was not out partying. Amanda is here for Hannah, as Hannah is in her first year of getting her master's in public health. So Amanda's been on the podcast a couple times. She should be a familiar face. And so is our guest today. Dr. Sara Russell has been on to talk about blood work and pregnancy. Sarah, I think those were you did 2 episodes on blood work and pregnancy.
Pregnancy and postpartum. Yeah.
And postpartum. Yeah. The topic being that blood work and the results that you see and the ranges that those results should be interpreted with are way different in by trimester and postpartum. But we are here today. The topic is not just MTHFR. That was the way that I named it in the podcast episode, but the different variants that can occur in the gene that creates the enzyme that we need. And the context of this is that it's kind of come up in pop medicine and pop nutrition lately after the press conference that President Trump and RFK and some other people in the healthcare world had about acetaminophen. And so I started to see it. I don't know if you all started to see it on your social channels, people bringing this genetic component and this biochemical pathway that we have pulled up here just to show you, like, this is literally what we're going to talk about today, is this biochemical pathway as part of the acetaminophen risk of autism spectrum disorders and pregnancy, that whole context. So we are going to do our best to shed some light on this today. I'll shut up and let Amanda and Sara talk. But just as kind of a prequel to this, we are not biochemists. I'm sure there are biochemists who have dedicated their entire careers to studying this specific topic, but we have studied this in the context of a clinical setting. I mean, it's one of the reasons, Sara, that I appreciate you being here, is because I know that you have a brilliant research brain and a brilliant clinical brain. So there's a lot of places we can start. We have a reference sheet with all the studies that we've been checking out. What are you all thinking?
I mean, I think it's always good to just start with a little bit of defining terms. What is folate? What is MTHFR? What are methyl groups? Just to kind of start the conversation. And I mean, it's helpful you've already pulled up an image. And I would argue that some researchers and biochemists would dedicate their whole career to just one of these tiny enzymes within this huge network of enzymatic pathways and metabolic pathways within the body that involve methylation. So I can give that a whack. I'll try.
We got your back, Amanda. I know. So, just full disclosure, I didn't get much sleep because I'm a workaholic. Amanda, you didn't get much sleep because you have a sweet little baby that you're taking care of. Sara may be firing on all cylinders.
Too much.
This is the perfect example of a U-curve, which we will talk about today. In relation to too much or too little sleep can be problematic.
Well,
we got you though, Amanda.
I'll just disclose that I have a hard time explaining methylation on my best day. It's just such an incredibly complex topic that as a nutritionist who's been studying biochemistry and nutrition for, almost 2 decades now, it's like I still feel completely inept in terms of really understanding methylation and how profound it is in the body. But so I come at it with a big dose of intellectual humility. But here's how kind of I understand it. Maybe it will be helpful. So just one of the reasons why it's so difficult to kind of pin down, like, what exactly is methylation? What are we talking about when we talk about MTHFR and folate and all this stuff? Is that we have so many different genes that are producing enzymes that are involved with methylation in the body. And like a conservative estimate is that we have around 200 that are directly involved with methylation. And then if you like expand that a little bit more to the broader network of enzymes that are playing supportive roles or have some involvement in a methylation pathway, then you're looking at up to 500 plus genes that are going to influence your methylation status. And so when we're talking about methylation, we're talking about really the movement and placement of methyl groups around in the body. And when you study biochemistry, you start to realize that a lot of organic chemistry is built on these chains of carbon and hydrogen atoms, like fatty acids, or carbohydrates. So much of what we're eating and what our own bodies are made out of are just these kind of complex rearrangements of carbon and hydrogen backbones with some other elements attached to these carbon hydrogen backbones. And a methyl group is a one carbon compound. So it's just one carbon and 3 hydrogens. And so if you think about all these kind of structures in the body being made out of chains of carbon, you can think about the methyl group as this really powerful kind of jump link. It's like a kind of a magic single chain link that can be used to change the configuration of other carbon hydrogen chains. So it's a single carbon thing. So that because it's so basic and small in terms of biochemistry, that's why we use it in so many different processes. Methyl groups, we use them as kind of on and off switches in some places. We use them to recycle other compounds, biotransform the structure of certain compounds, and it makes it really hard to fully understand the scope of what methylation is.
I
So
mean,
I
there's
kind
a,
of
can I just like, this is I've been also trying to, Amanda, like, and Sarah, I know you struggle with this in like a positive way. Like we all like struggle to understand because and I think this is an important point, because at the end of the day, the people that we work with or the people that get the information that, I think like whatever spews out of my face, it's going to impact them. So I'm like struggling to try and like, make the world a better place. It's like, that's the whole thing. But in this, it's like, I've tried to be like, okay, if I had to describe this to like a 7-year-old, how would I do it? And essentially like what Amanda is saying is there is this group of carbon and hydrogens, and the body transfers these groups around and they attach them to other compounds in the body, and then it impacts how those other compounds act. So, I mean, that's kind of the like cartoon biochemically, cartoon biochemistry way to say it is those compounds get moved around in the body. And like you're saying, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chemical reactions per day that either influence methylation or are directly methylation. But it's just a way that the body moves these it's the elements. It's the periodic table of elements around in our bodies. And then that influences the way that we do. I think you have the list of like all the kinds of like major processes we would think of that methyl groups and methylation influences.
Yeah, and this is completely oversimplified, but I think, which is what we're trying to do here. I think I kind of break it down into like 3 main groups of methylation activity, which again, way oversimplified, but one is the donor activity of these methyl groups, where we're just trying to give a methyl group to some sort of enzymatic process that's going to change the biochemistry of another compound. So this is where we think about folic acid and folate metabolism, where we're actually going to be donating a methyl group to make that folic acid or folate more bioavailable and usable within the body. We could supply a methyl group to to change the form of a metabolic byproduct called homocysteine back into the amino acid methionine. So that would be kind of the donor way. We could also say that our liver detox pathways use methyl groups as a donor, and one of those phase 2 pathways, where we're just attaching one of these methyl groups to a toxin to neutralize it and move it out of the body. So that's the kind of the supply of the substrate of these methyl groups. But we also see these methyl groups showing up in terms of epigenetics and the regulation of how our genes are expressed and how we process the things that our genes make. So kind of turning the volume up or down on specific genes is another huge role of methyl groups and methylation. And then they're also very, very involved in the production of energy and energy regulation in the body. So, and that's just like, I just barely touched on a few of them. They're involved in making membranes. They're involved in the regulation of neurotransmitters. But generally that, like, supplying a single methyl group to another enzymatic reaction, regulating our epigenetics, and then also fueling energy production in the body are three of the main groups. So we're going to be really talking a lot about MTHFR, where we're looking at trying to grab the enzymes that are involved in moving around methyl groups on folate, which is a B vitamin. So,
but it's just one, like I saw, like, Sarah, I thought about you when I saw this one, kind of inroad of methylation with histamine clearance, which I didn't know that until I started to research this.
Yeah, absolutely. That
and
histamine is one of the histamine is one of the main markers that you can actually use to assess how well someone is methylating. The two main markers that you would, the first one is obviously homocysteine, and that's the one that I think about with just about everyone. But if I'm working with somebody who has histamine symptoms or a history of anything in the allergic realm, absolutely, we look at histamine too, in addition to homocysteine.
I always think of, like, the 7 dwarves of histamine, like sneezy, itchy, scratchy, hivey.
Yeah.
That's my little fairy tale mnemonic of remembering histamine symptoms. But do you look at histamine in the blood somehow, Sarah, or are you just looking at symptoms?
Yeah, you can look at whole blood histamine.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
No idea.
Mine, by the way, was completely normal when I measured it. I was like, wait, what?
Your histamine was normal on your blood test?
It was completely normal. I was like,
okay, well, you should explain, though, Sarah, why that's funny to you. I mean, I also am like, oh my God, I can't believe that. But
yeah. Okay. So
yeah, people don't know why that would be, but it's a very interesting story why, if you're comfortable with sharing it.
Yeah, sure. I think I am the only person I know whose immune system has a nickname. Do you all know what my immune system's nickname is? It's Don Quixote. And that is because my immune system is regularly known to go fighting against windmills instead of like, actual enemies.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And how fabulous.
Yeah, totally. I have a picaresque immune system. On the one hand, I have an autoimmune condition that destroys 2 parts of my white blood cells, my neutrophils and lymphocytes, which caused me a lot of problems in the past, in particular before I figured out how to sort of rein that in a bit. And that has nothing to do with histamine. The other side of my immune dysfunction is that I have a wildly allergic reactive system. So I sneeze so violently. Like I had a neighbor once when I was living in the mountains in 2016. Like houses are not that close to each other, but she could hear me sneezing from her house, which was like, a good distance away. And she asked me one day, do you believe in God? And I was like, I'm not really sure. And she was like, if I did, I would stop if I were you, because or I would hate him so much because he's very mean to you.
Oh my God.
It was very funny. Anyway,
It's an interesting context though, Sarah. I mean, so do you
Yeah.
think that you have histamine symptoms because this is a little bit of an aside,
Yeah.
but I think it's a complete aside, but I think it's very cool. And I think our listeners will be interested in it. So do you think
Yeah.
it's not because you have too much histamine, but because your body can't contain or regulate the histamine properly?
So because I have hypermobility spectrum disorder / hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I have like a bigger issue of dysfunction inside the extracellular matrix that affects, where basically there's this crosstalk between growth factors affecting connective tissue. And one of the things that helps activate those growth factors is actually stimulating the body to produce more mast cell mediators, which are mainly histamine and tryptase.
Yeah.
So I might just overexpress those symptoms in order for my body to try to compensate and be more efficient with my connective tissue integrity.
Remodeling.
Yeah. But unfortunately, the violent sneezing has also caused me to like throw out ribs and like tear muscles in my back. And like I try to explain to people it's not just like sneezing. I am constantly in PT and all spring.
Because of it.
I also live in the world of olive trees. One of my main allergens is olive pollen. It sucks. It's very funny, but yeah.
Well, but okay, thank God though you have normal histamine level and that you do know about methylation, and because that is one kind of part of clearing. I mean, I guess you don't have a histamine clearance issue though, but if one does, and I think that it's like a hot topic in nutrition. I don't see it on social media as much, but I think mold has kind of taken over from histamine as like the darling concept of the day, but methylation is part of the way that we clear histamine, along with all of the kind of other properties that Amanda has been speaking to.
So, Sarah, would you say that like your own health journey and what you're talking about here, I guess with histamine, but also with methylation, is that mirrored in the client population that you've chosen to work with?
I didn't specifically choose my client population. It's very interesting how this works. Because when I first started my clinical practice in 2013, well, actually, before I even signed up for nutrition school, I went in wanting to work specifically with reproductive care. I thought that was going to be the exclusive focus of my practice. But when I opened my doors, the referrals I was getting were all for complex health issues. And so I got a lot of referrals for kids on the autism spectrum, for I didn't go into it wanting to work with hypermobile people per se, but they came to me. They just did.
There's a crossover there, right?
Yeah. And
explain that crossover, please, Sarah.
Between autism spectrum disorder and hypermobility? Yeah. So there's a very interesting scholar called she's a neuroscientist called Emily Casanova, and she is the main author on a paper that discussed the overlap, which is it's definitely something that a lot of us have seen clinically in family clusters of either co-occurrence in the same individual of hypermobility and autism spectrum disorder, or within immediate family members. Say, you'll have a hypermobile mother and she'll have one or more kids on the autism spectrum. And what they discovered in their study that included thousands of people, I don't remember how big the sample size was, but they found that the risk of a mother with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility spectrum disorder having a child with autism spectrum disorder is exactly the same risk as if the mother had autism spectrum disorder. So this, and there are, one of the arguments that they made in the paper is that hypermobility is kind of like an autism symptom. I mean, they're sort of like in the same cluster,
or something.
in the same family. So maybe it would be fair. to say that hypermobility kind of fits into the broader autism phenotype, and that autism spectrum disorder / neurodivergence definitely fits into the broader hypermobility phenotype.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Sarah, I personally, same. I'm extremely hypermobile, whatever my brain does. Like, neurodivergence, sure, we can start there. And then, okay, could you speak to how, well, maybe we should say first, like, get more specific into like the specifically way we're going to talk about methylation today, and then how that maybe connects into these different patient groups, because what you're talking about is clinically relevant to like why MTHFR and acetaminophen and autism is like in the news and in the, public psyche right now. I just am thinking as you're talking, like kind of the focus of that press conference was, like, hey, acetaminophen could be harmful when women take it when they're pregnant to the fetus and then to the baby. It could be a contributor. Well, they were not as careful in their words, but it could be a contributor to autism spectrum disorders. And so like a lot of what Hannah and I have done and Amanda and I have done in past episodes is kind of like parsed through what are all of the risk factors, how big of a risk factor is acetaminophen, Tylenol. And it's like, it's interesting to hear what you're saying, where it's like, if the mother is hypermobile, the risk that her child has autism or is somewhere on the spectrum is just as high as if she were autistic. And it's like, I don't think we even talked about that, Amanda, when we were talking to Bob Block about acetaminophen. It was like, that wasn't even one of the confounders that autoimmune disease was, but not hypermobility. So to me is just to kind of like put a little context around this for people who are like, God, how do you parse this out? It is complicated because we're chemistry sets. We're walking, feeling, loving, warring chemistry sets. And so I think that's part of the reason why people who have been studying this for a long time, or who really, I think I could say personally, really care about this and care about it being accurate, and then using that accuracy to get really practical help for the people that aren't particularly studying this, is because it is so complex and it takes some time to really work through all of the complexity as best we can. And so just to hear kind of like claims thrown around, it's difficult to hear. Like it's hard. So I think that's all three of our goals today, is to be like, okay, how can we look at this in the most complex, but also actionable way possible, so that people walk away and they're like, okay, this actually is what methylation is, and this is the impact of these different gene variants on people. So I actually have it's just a little write-up pulled up. It's from Medline Plus, which is actually one of my favorite websites to go to just for like kind of quick overviews. It's medlineplus.gov, but they're speaking to the MTHFR gene, which means methylenetetrahydrofolate reductase. Is that pronounced right, guys? Did I do that right?
I did it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. And so just to kind of give people the specificity for today, so we call it the MTHFR, which actually, I know you guys, like, surely in your mind, do you kind of think mother effer? That's what I think.
Sure. Yes.
When I said, I actually saw a copy not long ago on who has the Function Health. Mark Hyman, has this blood test service now, Function Health. It's like this beautiful interface. Actually, I have a friend who showed me her blood test results, and I was like, oh my God, like the website deserves like a Webby award. But anyway, they had copy for the service that it said what in the MTHFR is going on. And I was like, whoever wrote that copy deserves also like accolades. Like it was just really like interesting the way that they put it. Good use of marketing. So, but that does stand for methylenetetrahydrofolate reductase. So the gene, and Amanda, you're good at explaining this. So after I read this, maybe like go in and like put in any specifics. That gene is like the cook a gene, I guess, is maybe like the recipe. So it's the recipe for instructions for making all of the different proteins in our body. That's what genes do. I think some people maybe don't realize that. So the genes are like these instructions for creating all these proteins, and proteins are the backbones of enzymes, hormones, all of our connective tissue, our structure, neurotransmitters. It's a lot of what we kind of study and think about in the body as far as like the compounds that we're really looking at. They are protein based. So this particular gene provides instructions for making an enzyme called methylenetetrahydrofolate reductase. And so that enzyme processes amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. And MTHFR is important for this chemical reaction in this chart that we have pulled up here on the screen. It's like our fourth person on the podcast today is like folate metabolism biochemistry chart. So this chemical reaction involves folate, which is B9, so it's a B vitamin, and this enzyme converts this one form of folate called 5,10 methylenetetrahydrofolate to a different form. It like basically takes the 10 off. It just becomes 5 methyl tetrahydrofolate. So, and then this is important because that's the primary form of folate that's found in the blood. And that form goes through this multi-step process that we have pulled up here to convert the amino acid homocysteine to another amino acid, methionine. And then the body uses methionine for all kinds of other things. So when you earlier in the podcast heard Sara talk about, okay, 2 of the main markers that we look at to understand how someone is methylating is homocysteine and histamine. That's why if you happen to get a really like hardy blood panel, often it will include homocysteine. I think, I've gone just to like my regular doc and they don't include homocysteine, but you can ask for homocysteine. And it is a fairly reliable way to see in this pathway how you're methylating, which you may be methylating just fine in other areas. But in this particular area, you may not be methylating properly. And it is, we talked about this a little bit, off mic, but there are other reasons why homocysteine can be high. So it's not set in stone that if your homocysteine is a little bit elevated, that you have this variant in the MTHFR gene, but you could. So that's really the main focus for today, is these different variants in this one gene that influences this process. Does that all sound right to you guys?
Yeah. So, and I think just that folate, especially in the form of 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, which we have to create through these enzymatic steps. That is one of the main ways that the body is moving around these methyl groups and using the methyl groups to recycle things like you were saying, like homocysteine back into methionine. So that's why folate in particular is the star of this conversation. And that whole pathway, there's several enzymes involved in converting either dietary folate or supplemental folic acid into, ultimately getting it down into 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. MTHFR is kind of one of the last enzymatic steps at the bottom of this funnel, where we're trying to produce the final products that we can then send out into the body, and it can help us recycle homocysteine in particular, which is really important when we're talking about fetal development and birth defects and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think I just want to point this out to people who are looking at this chart. We talked about like the liver processes, like we think about liver and detox. It is extremely important, methylation in those processes, to make the compounds that the liver is breaking down and trying to get out able for our body to expel it. But like this is, illustrated near the intestinal mucosa, happening in the intestinal mucosa, which is also an incredibly important organ for, like our nervous system, our ability to detoxify, like so many things. And if you look at this chart, you start to see they have inserted, the reason that I love this chart, all of the different vitamins and nutrients that are required. And I'm going to like really hit on that word. It's like those nutrients are required for these processes. It is not optional. If you do not have the nutrients, these processes will not work properly. I can't remember which teacher I worked with who was like nutritional biochemistry I always stumble over this. There's like a word for it. It's like, you don't need to say both of those in the same term. Biochemistry is nutritionally based. Like,
That's great.
there's no separating those two. And I think people don't realize that. So they're focused on, have to take methylated Bs, or I have to take this certain nutrient. And it's like, yeah, there's maybe, we're going to discuss that today, but what you also need are all of these other nutrients in order for just this pathway to work properly.
Yeah.
This is one of, have you all ever seen that major biochemistry chart? I can't remember who made it. It's like kind of like every metabolic pathway in the body. And it's, oh my
metabolic
God.
pathways. Yeah. It's so good.
It makes you just want to crawl under the bed and pull the covers over your head. So, I think it's important to point that out as we're discussing it. This is not just a folate conversation, even though it is kind of the star of the show. Folate has, backup singers that they're really important.
Yeah, like B6, B12, riboflavin, B2,
Choline,
choline, betaine,
Yeah.
several minerals.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm kind of wondering, like, should we we have a reference document. Should we check that out and kind of like go through the list of questions that people are probably asking right now? Like, so kind of the first one that I have pulled up here is, I think we did a pretty good job of the biochem. I'm going to give us a gold star for that. Okay. So one of the main questions that I've seen come up on social media is like, kind of let's say the MTHFR SNPs, the most common ones. There's two main single nucleotide polymorphisms. So variants in the way that our genes were formed in us when we were being formed, that were passed on to us from our parents. There are two main ways that those variants express. There's all kinds of variants, but the two most common ones, the most common one is C677T. Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, or Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong. It is the most common, and so I'm guessing that's why it's the most studied. Like, we have the most research on that SNP.
Yeah, and I forget what the percentages are. Maybe you know this, Sarah, in terms of efficacy, like how much we see it, like what amount of reduction and methylation capacity do we see with that variant? Do you know that number off the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, I really hate those charts actually, but it anywhere from 20 to like 70%. But
It's
these
dependent
are
on other genes. It's dependent on
incredibly
context.
misleading, because you can't just assume that your function is going to come simply from this blueprint. Like, when we over focus on, oh gosh, I have I'm heterozygous, or I'm homozygous positive for 677C. People get so hung up, they completely forget that they can eat food.
Well, and
or if they're pregnant or trying to conceive, for some reason, the population of people and practitioners who are some practitioners and many of the influencers, depending on what people are trying to sell ideologically and product wise, they will often be the same people who are viciously opposed to any form of prenatal vitamins. So, like, these people are often part of the desiccated liver sect cult.
Sarah has and me too. It's I feel wound up about that. Amanda, I'm sure you've seen that. You just had a baby. But yeah,
the point of it being that it does reduce this specific SNP can be part of a reduction in methylation efficiency capacity, but that is just one piece of a polygenic pathway, the process that's affected by many different genes, the nutrient status of many different nutrients. What other things do you have kind of taxing those pathways? So it's a very complex picture, trying to tie down one specific percentage in terms of how it's going to reduce your methylation capacity is oversimplified, but it does potentially slow your methylation pathway to some degree. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
It has a potential to do it. So what's very interesting, I don't typically, well, I will say I have never actively suggested people get SNP testing in my practice, but people come to me a lot of the time with SNP test results, and they're always very interesting to look at. And I will tell you that I see people completely all over the map with their 677 and 1298
That's the other
MTHFR.
common variant for people just to know. There's like it's like where on the gene the variant occurs. There's like a substitution. It's like, so where it occurs, and then the substitution is where those names come from. But just so people know that other number that you said, I have to always look it up, the 1298C or like that. Those are the two most common. So go ahead, Sarah.
Are you saying that there's that you don't always see a clear association between the actual SNP testing and homocysteine levels?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I see much more of so I find these tests to even be sort of misleading. And also, for a lot of people, I find them to be demoralizing. People start telling themselves stories about health limitations that they don't actually have a lot of the time. So I really, I almost always suggest that people check their homocysteine levels. But because I find that to be functionally much more useful.
That's one of the main outcomes that matters, and it's a moving target. So it's not there's a clear way to affect change on homocysteine levels, and it's not like that identity that you're saying, where if you're doing a genetic test, you find out you have a SNP, there's this potential to take that on as an identity in a very limiting and potentially fear-provoking, self-defeating way, versus if you're looking at this marker that's actually outcome related and modifiable, it's a little bit more clinically relevant and empowering personally. Is that?
So one thing that that is very interesting to think about is that one of the two ethnicities that have the highest incidence of MTHFR variants are the Mexican population and Italian Mediterraneans. And the rate of Italian Mediterranean health problems that are associated with MTHFR dysfunction is much lower than the average, than the incidence in the US. And I think that has a lot to do with stress levels. Some people think that Italians have wonderful diets. They eat a lot of sugar.
Sarah, you live in Italy. I mean, people should know that.
I do.
And
I do.
I've visited, and I'm like, these people, I actually came home and I was like, they live on like espresso, chocolate, meat, and wine, and maybe some eggplant and tomatoes. Like that's what I ate when I was there.
Well, there's also when we see a SNP that continues in populations at such relatively high levels, it's always interesting to ask, okay, so was there an environment potentially that this was protective or
malaria,
less harmful?
So
go ahead.
At least the 677 polymorphism is protective against malaria. People in certain malaria endemic areas evolved with this genetic sort of or epigenetic edge because they were more protected, so they were more likely to reach reproductive age and have babies who also have the same variants.
So let's talk that out real quick. That this is a crucial part of the genetic conversation that is the most fascinating to me. So I'm going to make us talk about it. But I think it's also clinically relevant. When we think about our lives, we don't think about evolution, but evolutionarily, just on that level, all that matters is that we have survivable progeny. So all evolution, the continuation of our species, you guys did it, Amanda and Sarah, 10 out of 10. I have failed the evolutionary tree of human beings. Sorry, everyone. But so all it cares about is that you get to a point where you can have a baby and that baby survives, right? Everything else does not matter to evolution. This is so important. We just talked to Dr. Angie Martinez about bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, which I've always had a little bit of a bias about. One, I'm not old enough, so I need to shut the F up. But two, I was like, wait, like we didn't have this and women went through menopause. And she was like, yeah, but evolution doesn't care about you after you can't reproduce anymore. And so do you want to feel better after menopause or not? And so you get to pick that now.
Totally.
Awesome. Totally into that. When she explained that to me, I felt like my brain was going to explode. So you kind of have to think of it in the same context here. All that evolution cares about is that you have a survivable progeny and then it's done with you, essentially. I mean,
although there are things like, what is it, the grandma hypothesis or something, where where you if you have senior citizens around you, have a much everybody else below them has a much higher chance for survival if they can take care of kids and pass on wisdom, like which plants are poisonous, and allow the reproductive group to go out and hunt and gather and everything. So but I hear you in terms of just like DNA's an incredible will to get into the future.
And Amanda, I love that. Radiolab, I think, just did an episode on the grandmother hypothesis and like on menopause, what other species go through menopause. And it's a fascinating episode. I love Radiolab. Yeah. God, their production team would be so dreamy. Anyway, my point is
well taken.
Yeah. You wanting to like have great, methylation status as you age, into your like 30s and 40s and beyond. Evolution's like, whatever, we saved you from malaria or, and for whatever other reasons this genetic variant has continued. And evolution hasn't maybe gotten the message yet that, hey, I live in a place that they're spraying for mosquitoes and, the water's clean or whatever, and I don't need this variant anymore. And it continues to pass it on. So I think it's a really like helpful reframing. Just as I'm talking this out, sorry, I'm like having this realization like in real time. It's like the reason that I think it's important to think about things in this like more like broad way of like seeing the full picture is exactly, it's like a push against the like getting caught in this, I have this bad thing wrong with me. I have celiac. I have this bad thing wrong with me, or I have this genetic variant. I have this bad thing wrong with me, or whatever. Oh, Amanda, don't worry about it. We make noise on mic all the time. If our listeners aren't used to it by now, whatever, and it's like we kind of get in these stories and there is tons of research and tons of clinical evidence. I know that we have all seen this in practice and with our students, where you get in that mindset and it's like your world gets smaller and smaller and you get sicker and sicker. But when you can see the big picture of like how all this kind of works together and you're just kind of this one part of like a bigger process that is not good or bad, it just is for its own sake. Like, entropy is why we die. By the way, it's just, you're just part of the laws of thermodynamics as a human. It's just part of it. It like broadens, I think, your ability to like see yourself. And it's like, all of a sudden you're not just somebody with an MTHFR variant who can't methylate right. It's like, no, wait, there's a reason for this. There's a rationale, and it's the beauty of how our universe works. Like, you're part of that. Sorry. Or not, not sorry. It's like, so I think it's like a really important thing to talk about. And so, Sarah, I mean, it's so cool to think about, oh yeah, that saved us, that variant.
Yeah.
And now maybe we have to eat more collard greens.
For sure.
Okay.
And that is
they're methyl donors.
And that is what the Italian population is doing right, has been doing right. So they're not very good on the sugar front. We'll give them that much. But on the dietary diversity front, I will say that the average traditional, especially Mediterranean, like farther south you go in Italy, diet is very dietarily diverse. There's so many people who they still have their little garden patch where they're growing their own seasonal vegetables. They eat with the seasons. They buy, many Italians will basically have this, like pyramid idea. Like, first of all, like Italians do not eat tomatoes in the winter. They're like,
Interesting.
what the heck are you doing? Like, they may preserve their tomatoes in the summer to eat as a sauce in the winter, but you
Yeah.
would not buy a tomato and have it on salad in the winter. That's
Sure,
like
that's how we are in the South, and that
crazy.
totally tracks for people.
Yeah, but people eat they eat broccoli, they eat kale. People are not worried about what influencers are saying about, oh, you can't put milk in your coffee, or polyphenols are bad for you. They're not worried about phytic acid or any of these things that Americans are terrified of as anti-nutrients. I mean, they're eating all things.
Yeah.
And
those foods, just to clarify, like greens, broccoli, like there are certain foods that they have more methyl groups, like leafy greens, dark leafy greens, it's like the food you always hear about if you have issues with methylation. Like I've heard Ben Lynch say this over and over, and I actually really respect him for this because he sells a ton of supplements, but he also says, eat your leafy greens, people. That's like the best way to
Folate.
yeah, to get into to improve, this process. So anyway,
So
yeah.
is this a good pivot point? Because I'm hearing the two like big questions around what about folic acid fortification and supplementation, and should I be, if I'm not eating enough leafy greens, or am I, if I am, should I be taking methylated B vitamins if I have MTHFR? I feel like those are going to be two of the biggest
Big
questions out there.
Yeah.
yeah. Do you want me to
Go for it, Sarah. Yeah, we'll be your, gallery here on the side.
Great. Yeah. So I wanted to add that chicken liver is actually a wonderful whole food that supplies folate in very bioavailable form without this extremely high level of iron and copper that might just be overwhelming to some people in terms of beef liver. So I find, and it has
Tastes a lot
choline.
better.
Liver is a great source of choline as well, which is also very good for methylation. So it's a great food to keep on your radar if you can. Okay, so I wanted to say these methylation, MTHFR, SNPs are incredibly common in the population. So fortunately, we don't see 40 to 60% of people being worried about this stuff on a daily basis. And we certainly don't see 40 to 60% of people having health problems associated with the potential for dysregulation of this pathway. So the first thing I want to say is sometimes we forget, it's so easy to be critical of public health measures that are sort of then ascribed to the them of the allopathic realm.
Yeah, totally.
I really want to talk about this because I think that the folic acid fortification thing, much like iodizing salt, these things, for some reason, we have forgotten how much of a benefit these two public health measures have had.
Because they worked, Sarah. That's why we forgot.
They worked. Yes.
It's like your digestion. When you have digestive problems, you don't notice a thing.
Yeah. I worked with a client. One of my first clients in my practice was a little boy with an ultra rare genetic problem that affected his folate. And he had, by the time he came to me when he was, I think, 16 months old, he had like 17 surgeries just to make his face look human.
Yeah.
Sweetest little boy. He's now 12 and a half or something. And it just, but it's been so much effort. And we don't see in the US, and in most Western countries, it's extraordinarily rare to see cleft palate, to see these severe manifestations of neural tube defects. And guess what? Like, there was a lot of activity and a lot of really important research that went into figuring out, why do these defects occur? Why, what can we do to prevent them? And this is where the push to fortify non-whole grains with folic acid came in. Also, the push towards encouraging women before conception and during pregnancy, especially early pregnancy, to take a multi.
Mhm.
And, sometimes we forget, especially if we are part of a more privileged economic group, that folic acid is a lot more affordable than the more active forms of folate. So, and once we get to bias, I definitely have, I have a
Go for it,
personal
Sarah. We're
bias
there. Let
towards
it out.
calcium folinate. I don't love folic acid, but I will say this is because of the case histories that I've taken from the client populations that I predominantly work with. And these are people who do not often, because of the problems that they have, metabolize folic acid as well as, just the average Joe on the street.
Mhm.
But on a public health level, folic acid has had an incredibly positive net benefit.
So this is the question, I mean, that I think listeners are I'm asking myself also. Is folic acid harmful to people who have MTHFR SNPs?
I
The
can
genetic
try
variant.
to make that argument just so that
Yeah,
we
let's steel
understand
man
what
it. I
that.
think
Okay.
that's important.
I don't know if I can. Okay, so here's how the argument goes. This is, for people who are really worried about folic acid, here's their reasoning. It's the idea of a bottleneck in the funnel, the enzymatically driven funnel that we use to convert dietary folate or supplemental folic acid into the bioavailable form 5-MTHF, 5-methyletetrahydrofolate. So the idea is that we need to use this enzyme called DHFR to convert folate and folic acid. And it's multi-steps. We actually have to use that enzyme twice to reduce, I think both folate and folic acid. Folic acid has one additional step, but that, some individuals can have variability in how much of that DHFR that reductase enzyme they make, but also folic acid, the synthetic version of folate, has the highest affinity for that enzyme. And
Mhm.
so if you're taking in a bunch of folic acid, it can kind of oversaturate that DHFR enzyme so that you aren't able to like the lower steps that are still requiring that enzyme don't get completed, basically. So like the converted versions can't make it all the way through the funnel because you've got folic acid, the synthetic form, kind of saturating that enzyme, making less of it available to complete the final steps of converting it into 5-MTHF. And then there's also MTHFR enzyme at the end of that funnel that is also required for the production of 5-MTHF. And so there's this idea that once this starts to happen and you get excess folic acid floating around unmetabolized, that can even lead to inhibition of further inhibition of the MTHFR enzyme as well. So that, net, you end up potentially having less output in this whole pathway of the bioactive MTHF, which we need to be able to, recycle methionine, homocysteine back into methionine. Okay, so that's the argument.
We can see this here on the charts, Amanda, what you just said. So the DHFR converts MTHFD, it looks like, is the you see this up here is the
I think this
the
is
product.
earlier in that, so we're further down. Let's zoom in on that.
Yeah, so I've read that also, Amanda. Like I've read it more though, like in even blogs I really trust, or in write-ups I really trust. But I'm like, I can't find like, a citation where I'm like, oh, that is like really what explains it.
I think, yeah, so the problem with this is then why does supplementing with folic acid clearly improve the 5-MTHF status
Right.
in people, and why then does it also help to lower homocysteine even in people with MTHFR SNPs, and prevent neural tube disorder,
Defects.
defects. Thank you.
Congenital malfunctions.
So that's kind of like
Talking about this, Amanda,
yeah.
folic acid actually lowers homocysteine more efficiently than 5-MTHF.
So this is the thing, is like where we see this in nutrition and so much, where we have a mechanistic theory where we're like, look, we could get this bottleneck. This is going to be a problem. We're worried about this, but we're really looking at mechanism versus outcome. And then you look at the outcome studies and you're like, actually, something must be happening here that we don't fully understand because outcomes look good. I mean, you see the same thing with like ascorbic acid as well. And it's similar with our whole Tylenol and conversation, where like when you're just looking at the mechanistic studies, it's really concerning. But then if you look at the outcome studies, it's like maybe in a complex organism there are other things coming into play that can compensate for this potential mechanistic weakness that we've identified. So don't just focus on that mechanistic weakness. Include outcome studies and data in your decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree that that's part of it. But what is very interesting is that in specific patient populations, like autism spectrum disorder, we do see, like if you look at those populations, there is a fivefold increased odds of having autism spectrum disorder if you have the 677 variant and the 1298, and a sixfold increased odds of having autism spectrum disorder with the 677.
Oh, there we go.
Which
that you just explained so many things about my life, Sarah.
It can vary by, different studies give different.
I pulled quite a few studies, and I haven't looked at the body of literature enough to know if it's equivocal or not, but it's like some studies do show an association, like what and that's a pretty freaking strong, 5 or 6 times more odds.
Do you have a sense of why folic acid would potentially? Are you saying that folic acid has been shown to lower homocysteine more effectively than methylfolate supplementation? Did I catch that?
Yeah, and it's more stable.
Does that show up? It's more stable, right? It's more shelf stable. Is that reflected in any term in the odds ratios or the risk for autism?
It's very hard for me to answer that question. I really don't know. And I think that part of the problem is that we don't have enough data. I don't think I've seen any studies that compare, situations where there are so many women who are pregnant or who have recently been pregnant who could be pulled into a study where they ask them, just based on their personal choice. This does not have to be a randomized placebo, randomized controlled trial where you just get put into, a group of people where, in pregnancy, that can be an ethical problem. But asking women, what did you choose to do? No prenatal. So neither, no form of folate or folic acid supplementation, a prenatal with folic acid, a prenatal with methylated folate, or a prenatal with calcium folinate / folinic acid. So those studies
another form. Surprise. There's a whole other form. People probably don't know that. I'm just thinking, like, you've heard of folic acid, you've heard of folate. People kind of in the natural world are like, oh, I think I'm supposed to take folate. Then there's like the methylfolate, but then there's folinic acid. It's like there are these many different forms of B9
absolutely.
that you can take.
Yeah. So that's part of the problem. We don't have these comparative studies, so we don't know exactly. All we can do is. The other thing is, people with autism spectrum disorder often have SNPs that also affect their glutathione expression, and that's really quite significant. So if you have, say, it's not just about MTHFR. I really think that the people who are probably struggling the most with these areas of health are people who have issues with MTHFR, COMT, CBS,
complications,
just all these various things, and they sort of all go together, and a little bit of autoimmunity here and there.
Also, an aversion to certain foods.
Absolutely.
We haven't even talked about, like, from a clinical
Yeah.
perspective. It's like, yeah, if you don't want to have certain textures or tastes or like that, then your
Yeah,
ability to mitigate this is reduced.
so you get a
Absolutely.
synergistic effect between multiple SNPs in the methylation pathways and nutrient deficiencies, and then
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But, one of the studies looked, it was, I think it was a 2016 or 17 study that looked at data that found an association between pregnant mothers with higher levels of B12 and folate in the blood, and that was associated with an increased risk of having autistic children. Now,
Oh my God, so too much.
yeah, so this goes back to the U curve thing.
Yeah, why is it there?
We don't know, and this is the problem.
Right.
We don't know if it was the form, and that's why
Or
we
a
need
transport
studies.
issue. Yeah.
It could be a transport issue. It could be a receptor issue. And so we just don't have the data. There are so many hypotheses, and I can see, some of them being potentially very interesting, but I can't get attached to any of them. I mean, because there are just so many variables and so many unknowns. We just don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's why I wanted this chart to be present during the podcast. And just, it's one of the reasons, Sarah, it's the reason that I wanted you to come on as a guest, because of all the people that I know, you have the best, I want to say, like, you probably have the broadest, like, reading of the research literature and the best ability to interpret it in the context of what actually happens in real life. So, you said something to me not long ago that, like, one of the issues is that when we say, like, oh, an MTHFR, variant can be attributed to X, Y, and Z, you're like, well, X, Y, and Z can also be attributed to all of these other reasons, like these, the problems that people are trying to solve, even if they do have an MTHFR variant, can be explained by so many different reasons that it's like we're not even sure if the MTHFR variant is what's causing it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just to build on that, Victoria, sometimes getting too focused on your MTHFR variants can make you actually miss what is really behind.
That's the problem. That is the problem.
I saw, I was studying endometriosis for a client over the summer. And one of the very interesting tidbits that I got from the research is that one of the problems is that while endometriosis is in some cases underdiagnosed, now sometimes it will get overdiagnosed in people, and it's not even the main problem. So sometimes people just have, like retrograde menstruation that then gets looked at, and then the physician is like, yeah, your problem is because of endometriosis, but that can be just an incidental finding. And there could be a gynecological problem that is being completely missed because the individual's gynecological symptoms are being attributed wholly to endometriosis. And this same thing happens in almost every area of functional care, where we get hyper focused on a specific thing like mold or MTHFR,
thyroid or chronic fatigue. Or I think people can understand this. And Amanda, I know that you have something to say, so I don't, like, please pin it in your brain. I think people can understand this in the context of, like, the judicial system, where it's like, let's say there's like a serial killer, and then they like find the guy, and it's like, okay, we got the guy, yay, okay, done. We're like, we're not looking anymore, problem solved. But then it's like the killings start again. It's like that pattern of, like, thinking like, oh, it's this thing, and then kind of abandoning the search, or abandoning, like, thinking in a full spectrum way. It happens all the time in, I think, functional care more than conventional care.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like started to be less and less interested in why, but what I do see is one of the reasons why is it because we have like we're influenced by trend as human beings. We just can't help it, right? It's like why I'm wearing these stupid ass glasses that are like the dorkiest. I joke that I'm like morphing into Mark Maron. You guys know Mark Maron, the comedian. I'm like, oh right, these like extremely trendy glasses, but I'd like totally look like this, 65-year-old male comedian. And it's because they're trendy, it's like, and the exact same thing happens in I'm sure in conventional medicine also, but man, I see it a lot in integrative care. And the problem is then that you miss what might actually be sometimes an even bigger problem.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I was gonna just tie in was kind of going back to a couple of mentions that you made, Sarah. One, the some studies that found like that U curve where if you have really high levels of methylfolate, is that what it was that you had actually higher rates of autism? What
Yeah.
was the
So
marker?
I don't remember the details of the study, but
Which
to my recollection, there was a positive association between high maternal serum levels of B12 and folate and their children having autism.
Okay. So what, and then you also mentioned briefly like little bits of autoimmunity. There's like this whole other area where we could be having issues with folate not getting into the central nervous system. That's like not actually that related to MTHFR, where, you've got folate receptors that people can have autoimmunity towards. So you're breaking down your own folate receptors, and that makes it harder to get into the brain. You can have problems with the, genetic problems with the transport proteins that are used to carry folate across the blood-brain barrier. So again, you get this central nervous system deficiency in folate, even though it could be floating around in your serum. And so that has been kind of a hot topic lately because RFK has been promoting leucovorin, which is an oncology drug where in cancer, sometimes they treatment, they will give you a drug that inhibits some of these enzymes involved in the production of active forms of folate because it slows down cellular replication or reproduction. Methotrexate, yeah. So to compensate for that kind of impairment that they're creating in this folate cycle, they give you folinic acid, and that is
exactly.
leucovorin, right? I'm sorry, not folic, folinic, high dose folinic acid. And so now that's what's being promoted as kind of like, okay, now here's the new fix-all is leucovorin, which is high dose folinic acid, which for a subset of people who are having cerebral folate deficiency due to some of these other issues that we just mentioned, like, some things going on with the ability for folate to get across the blood-brain barrier, that might really change their symptomology and be like, a sudden game changer.
Sure.
But it's just like, not getting myopic on one or the other. Like you're saying, you could be so focused on MTHFR, you miss the other potential things. You could be so focused on cerebral transport that you miss other things. So it makes it really difficult for people who are struggling with these conditions, especially because so much of the time you're kind of already so under the water with brain fog, anxiety, and insomnia, whatever the different symptoms, neurological symptoms that can be tied with these methylation issues, makes it so hard to try to tease all of this stuff apart for people with chronic conditions. And anyway, I love to know that there are people out there like you, Sarah, who are practicing in this more contextual, curious, holistic way, rather than kind of getting locked into just one formula and one way of interpreting these types of symptoms and conditions.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and just so much of this is I just don't know. When somebody asks me why is this, and I think that people get practitioners who feel overly confident about what they know. Those are the people who don't know what they don't know. Those are the people who are the most dangerous.
Exactly.
And or the people who don't want to be wrong. And this happens in allopathic care a lot. So, for example, one of the things that I always do is check interactions and contraindications between and among all of the prescribed medications clients are on. And I
Right.
see a lot of errors. Sometimes I'll look at somebody on polypharmacy, even a young person, 35 to 40. I work with a number of bipolar people, and those do tend to they tend to accumulate medications. And I usually find 5 to 8 contraindications and interactions just in checking their medications. And some of those are flagged as being, very serious. And sometimes the doctor doesn't want to be wrong. And I did have this case where a bipolar friend of mine was prescribed a blood pressure medication that was that had been found to, in conjunction with lithium carbonate, had been found to cause acute renal failure with, lethal implications, and over a dozen published case studies. And the doctor didn't care. She was like, "No, don't worry, keep taking it." And my friend said, "What should I do, Sarah?" And I said, "Email your psychiatrist and ask her what to do." And
Yeah.
email the
Or talk to a pharmacist is
Yeah.
always a good idea.
Pharmacists here,
Yeah.
they're very different from the ones in the US. They will never point out if the doctor made a mistake. But the psychiatrist threw a fit. She called the primary care physician and said, you can't do this to your patients. You just can't. And she told her patient to change doctors, and he did. There was no way that there could be trust established between them again. But these things happen, and they're very rare. I see a lot of iatrogenic harm being potentially or in some cases actually perpetrated either, by influencers influencing consumers directly, or by holistic practitioners who think they know, or may know a thing, but they don't know the other things that are influencing that thing. And nobody knows everything. That's very important. But the more humility you're able to have, and I love this about you, Amanda. When you started explaining the just the processes and the biochemistry of this pathway that we're talking about today, you started with this approach of humility, and you have so much clarity. And I think that a lot of the time, those two things go hand in hand. The people who tend to be most clear and the most helpful are the people who take the effort to slow down their own learning, not those people who are like rushing into stuff and I know it, and it's like the meme, right? And those are the people who risk doing the most harm, and
Yeah.
a lot in a holistic.
Yeah, I talk to my students all the time about the importance of saying you don't know, and the liberation that comes from, getting out of that illusion that we're going to know it all, or that, that we have there's like an egoic sense of like, somebody's going to pay me, they're going to come to me, I need to have the answers for them, versus the dynamic of like, somebody's going to pay me and I'm going to be their fellow researcher, ally, and I'm going to fully disclose that I don't know everything, and I could have major gaps in my understanding. I could give you the wrong recommendations. You should always double check what we're talking about with your other providers, do some research, and also be really willing and prepared to pivot if one of our therapeutic approaches doesn't seem to be improving your symptoms. And that's the other thing that is part of the potential harm here, is that you get so locked into this is the solution, this is my problem, here's the solution, that when that's actually not fully accurate, it's much harder to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to pause this, reevaluate, and try something different, get more information. And that's so, like, to me, I think that's because to some degree, we are always going to be making our best educated guesses and then having to go through a process of trial and error and seeing what the body has to say about what we're thinking. That ability to really be willing to listen, to hear, and to respond, even if what's coming back isn't aligned with what you thought was happening. That's so important.
Yeah. And I think we're really hard, or at least I can feel myself, I'm like hard on the functional medicine side of it, the integrative medicine side of it. And I think it's like how you can make fun of your cousins and your brothers and sisters, but like nobody else can. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like, these are my people. I am this, and I want us to do better. And it happens, of course, like you're saying, Sarah, that story is a perfect illustration on the conventional side. And I'm sure people are listening and they're like, God, I've seen like, my primary, this specialist, that specialist, this other specialist. I still don't know what's wrong. It's like there's so much siloing in conventional also. It's like it does happen on both sides of the fence. It's like it's a human problem. It's
Yes.
not an integrative or a conventional problem. It's a human problem. And I definitely get judgy as shit sometimes and need to tone it down, because probably what the solution is going to be is like, let's just like try and talk it out. It's like when you do get, like, we've had Bob Block on now twice, Sarah. He's this wonderful pharmacist.
Yeah. I've listened to your podcast with him. He's great.
So, it's like, okay, we're like reaching over the fence. It's like there's like good discussion happening, there's good discourse happening. That's like really where people can be helped, is when we get together. I mean, I think back to like, I had a conversation with my primary here, this wonderful doctor. He actually was my junior homecoming date in high school. And now he's now my primary care physician here. And I was like, hey, would you run my homocysteine on my blood test? I have the heterozygous 677T MTHFR. And he was like, yeah, but he was like totally receptive to
Mhm.
it, and
Yeah.
was curious. I was like, I'm especially interested. I can see it's my maternal side. My mom has kidney disease. The lower we get her homocysteine back into range, because it also runs high, the better her kidney function is. Like, we can see all of these connections. And he was open to it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like having those conversations is really what's going to move the needle. And I think versus this, like, sage on the stage, that this person that we kind of like elevate, and then they're saying it's this one particular thing. Kind
Mhm.
of the point that I kind of keep coming back to is, that the way that people have been, it's like the very end of the episode, but this is like the crux. People have been like, okay, acetaminophen that the mom takes, then she like can impact the fetus. And then if has an MTHFR SNP and she passes that onto the fetus, and the fetus has a decreased ability to like deal with this acetaminophen exposure, and then that can lead to, all of these problems. Or then they get vaccinated and the mom gives acetaminophen, and then they have the MTHFR SNP. And it's like this, like, that's like the like social media discourse around the MTHFR variants right now, and in the context of all of, how the press conference happened. And it's like, I hope people can see, it's like, yeah, there are connections there. Yes, there are connections there. And I think it's important to keep studying those connections, but there is in no way, and this is, I think, whatever their motivations are. I don't care. I mean, if somebody's right, they're right. Sorry if they have crappy motivations, and they might have shitty motivations, but there is no way that that you can see a direct line between acetaminophen, vaccine exposure, reaction, MTHFR SNPs. It's like, we don't know. And the reason that we don't know is, one, like the studies have not been done. And two, even if the studies were done, there would be some people in those, they would be huge population studies. There would be some people who were not impacted at all.
For sure.
And the reason why is because like this, chart that we're looking at right here is just like one like nth of the, if we pull up, I should pull up the Roche biological chart and just share it so that people can see, like, these are all of the, just what's happening in the body, not to mention the other impacts, right? The air, the food, the thoughts, the care, that all these different, it's the sleep, the pooping, the walking. It's like there's so many things that influence a human being. that's why people, again, I don't know motivation. My motivation is to say, think broadly and try to think critically about this. It is not this linear process. That is not how the human body works. And if we start to think in that way, the reason I rail against that is exactly what you said, Sarah. When you get so, focused, you miss other factors. You miss other problems that might even have more effect on that person than what you focused on. So if people are like, hush, I feel like they're so against what, RFK is saying, or they're so against this and that, it's like, I'm actually not against it. I just want an and at the end of that sentence.
For sure.
And
Yes.
Yeah.
we need to look at it in this bigger way. So I think it's worthwhile to speak to that. There is there's like a mechanism where, yeah, like if people do have an MTHFR SNP and they have a decreased ability to methylate properly, they might not be able to clear the acetaminophen byproducts properly, and that could be problematic. And given in the context of a vaccine, let's say, just say a healthy reaction, could that be problematic? Yeah, it could. Does that cause autism? We have no clue if it does.
If you look down on this graph, just to make the connection here, that why are we
Yeah.
talking about is because on one side of that graph is methylation, but in the far lower right-hand corner, you have the production of glutathione. So there's a connection between methylation, methyl status, and the production of glutathione. And glutathione is the key antioxidant that can neutralize one of the toxic byproducts of acetaminophen metabolism. That is the neurotoxic metabolic product of acetaminophen. So that I just wanted to loop that in, that methylation is involved in the production of glutathione. Glutathione protects you from acetaminophen toxicity.
And it's really important to remember that if you have homocysteine levels under 6, so if you have low homocysteine levels, that is an indicator of low glutathione potential, because you need one of the ways to make glutathione is from homocysteine.
Right.
So
that's a crazy.
It's really important, and this is one of the reasons for the U curve. So the people who are less healthy, and this could go back to that study, which we still don't have enough context around, that found an association between high B12 and folate levels in maternal serum and an increased risk of autism spectrum disorder in our offspring. Because, one of the things that was not, to my recollection, mentioned in the study was what were the maternal and offspring homocysteine levels. But if those were low, if those were below 6, and sometimes you can, in pregnancy, you have different homocysteine ranges, but if in a non-pregnant adult, under 6 would be a problem. In pregnancy, depending on the trimester, it's actually lower levels of homocysteine are completely fine and healthy. So don't go freaking out. If you're pregnant and have lower than 6 homocysteine, you're probably perfectly fine. But if, just taking away from the pregnancy context, because the research on this has been done on non-pregnant populations. But if you were to take a below normal, below optimal homocysteine level, and some people define optimal homocysteine as being just anything under 10 or under 8 or something, and that's not accurate,
7.
because excessively low homocysteine is associated with worse, just as bad health outcomes as high homocysteine. And in some studies, in one study, a Korean study, they found increased all-cause mortality in people with low homocysteine. And also another study found that people who rated their health as poor or very bad were more likely than people who rated their health as better to have low homocysteine.
Sarah, do you know whether or not, so I wanted to did we lose Victoria?
Yeah.
Are you still here, Victoria?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do want to, I guess we'll pause, but I wanted to, when she jumps back on, I wanted to try to bring this conversation back around to some takeaways on folic acid supplementation. The idea of being that we probably want to check our total intake and then make sure that it's within range,
Oh, yeah.
because there could be
Yeah.
problems with excessive intake. And then if there's any takeaways on like methylated B supplementation, because people are out there taking these enormous amounts.
Yeah.
And then the question there too is going to be whether or not excessive supplementation with methylated Bs could drive down homocysteine into these lower ranges. So
Yeah.
anyway, Victoria, I was just saying, if we have time, I know podcast has gone really long, but I was wanting to try to tie this back to some like practical takeaways on folic acid supplementation and methylated B supplementation for
Yeah,
people.
I think we should. I think
Yeah.
I got kicked out. Did you guys? No, I like disappeared for
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
while.
We noticed.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm back. But yeah,
Um,
I think to have practical takeaways is super important for this.
yeah.
Yeah, so kind of going back to what we were saying, well, that there's a lot of studies that actually show the beneficial outcomes of folic acid. In some cases, by some markers, even more beneficial than methylated methylfolate supplementation. And there's probably some real caveats around that in terms of making sure that you're not taking in too much and looking at all of your sources where, fortified foods, and maybe you're taking a B complex and a multivitamin and
For
some
sure.
like high nutrient food shake or whatever. So, Sarah, I wanted to see if you could speak to that. If we may be able to pull up some upper limits on folic acid supplementation,
Yeah.
where if you go beyond that, you could run into some of the
Yes.
problems that people warn about.
Yes. So allopathic medicine is absolutely aware of this issue. It is definitely something that has been discussed in that area. A lot of the time, people in the more kind of holistic or integrative field will point the finger at allopathic medicine and say, "Oh no, they have no idea." Like that's not true. There is an awareness and an ongoing discussion on safe upper levels of folic acid intake. That is set at 1 milligram per day. And so there are people who talk about lower tolerated levels. So for example, one of the things that Ben Lynch discusses is that should be, that we are not able to process more than 200 micrograms at a time. So theoretically, in divided doses would be way better than altogether. He also mentions, and this, I wasn't able to, I didn't have the time to go and check this against articles on PubMed, but he did mention that a lot of the studies that are done on folic acid metabolism were done on mice whose DHFR enzyme is like 700 times more efficient than in humans. I haven't checked that piece of information, but
yeah, metabolically, they're so much different.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why I would love to see comparative studies based on the choices that different pregnant women are making starting with preconception and throughout their pregnancy in terms of what they're already doing and what the associations are with outcomes in their own health, in their blood markers, not only of folate, B12, homocysteine, appropriately interpreted, by pregnancy ranges, not just like non-pregnancy ranges, and then, offspring outcomes. That would be really important. But yes, this is definitely a concern because one of the things that has been noted in the mainstream world is that because of how successful folic acid fortification programs have been, that some women are actually taking in too much. So they're exceeding during pregnancy between their prenatal vitamin and fortified foods. So, especially if you are also consuming some, foods that are fortified like nutritional yeast. And this is one reason why some vegan individuals have, have more problems associated with MTHFR issues is because of the massive amount of like synthetic fortification. I've seen this also with synthetic B6 in nutritional yeast, not even just in vegans, but just in people who say just liked it and had a lot of it on their popcorn or whatever. It's a thing. It happens sometimes. So, yeah. So I think that we just don't have a whole lot of information, but I do think that the prudence, that that is being voiced in this area is reasonable. I don't think that fear mongering is very helpful, and in fact,
No.
the more fearful we are, the higher our stress levels are, and that can really impact how
Our
our
B
health-
vitamins.
Our
That's such
enzymes
a
or some.
big-
our oxidative stress, our inflammation, like all these things. So, and our immune system. So that's not great. And I also really wanted to emphasize how important, this is not directly related, but just how important dietary diversity and gut flora balance, especially through prebiotic foods, which you mainly can only get from plants. Um, that's really important. And sometimes we forget that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worthwhile to say, like, Sarah, would you agree with this? It's like, whether you know if you have an MTHFR SNP or not, if you eat or take folic acid in a supplement, it's not harmful to you that we know of. There might be some, and we know there is like a reduced ability for you if you do have a SNP to transform that into the usable form of folate in the body, but we don't have strong evidence that it's harmful. It's
Right.
theoretical at this point. Do you
Theoret-
think
it's-
that's
Yeah. I will say though that on the basis of just the clinical histories that I've taken, person after person after person, on an individual level in certain specific types of client populations, I do feel like, gosh, we don't know if folic acid could be harmful, but I would prefer for these populations to, not, I don't tell them that it's dangerous. I tell them that I really prefer for them to take this particular prenatal that say has calcium folinate in it instead of
folic
folic.
acid?
Yeah, because just because we don't know something is bad for you doesn't mean that it's not. And,
Right.
Right.
and I'm not saying that from a fear mongering perspective. I'm just saying it from a
It's
precaution.
true. I think that's true. Yeah.
And, I also want to say that there are these, just like iodized salt and folic acid fortification of foods being incredibly beneficial from a public health perspective. I also think that sometimes we, on the opposite side on the other side of the coin, there are, for example, in bipolar disorder, which is one of the clinical areas that I see MTHFR issues and high homocysteine being rampant in this population. So the preferred and most studied mood stabilizer is lithium carbonate, and it is amazing. I think it has, the introduction of lithium carbonate has done so much on a public health level to stabilize people, and also on an individual level to help people just have a normal, functioning life. But there is a study that was published on lithium orotate as a really effective alternative that didn't have the same side effects for damage to the thyroid and kidneys that lithium carbonate has. Same thing, with pregnancy. The most studied form and the most recommended form of iron in allopathic medicine is ferrous sulfate, which is used at very high doses and has the potential for a lot of side effects. And while iron bisglycinate is not as well studied, it works really, really well.
Yeah.
And I really feel the same way for these specific client populations that I work with, about preferring calcium folinate / folinic acid, it's the same thing, to either methylfolate. Methylfolate is horrendous for my client population, I will say, in a lot of cases. And
Yeah, we
folic
didn't even touch on overmethylation.
Yeah.
We just, it's almost like we need to come back and talk.
Yeah.
Keep
I mean,
talking.
Do you want to just touch on that briefly? Because I think that's, a lot of people are out there just being like, well, I don't really know, but the marketing says that this is the most bioavailable form. And oh, yeah, by the way, I just looked at the label and it's like 12,000% of a recommended daily allowance.
Right.
But, I'm going to take this B complex anyway. Like, is there any kind of takeaways that we want to offer on supplementing with methylated B vitamins and methylfolate?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is that some people get very agitated from methylated B vitamins, or even like I
Just
had a
regular
therapist.
bees, that happens. They're a little bit stimulating.
Yeah, yeah. I personally had a terrible reaction to methylprednisone once.
Oh my God, Sarah.
So, so bad. And
Well, so, and it's good for people to know prednisone on its own, some people have like a little bit of like a psych reaction, like they
yeah,
feel really angry, or it can actually trigger bipolar episodes,
it
even in
can.
people yeah, prednisone is a
So
really interesting drug, but
I've taken
methylprednisone.
I've taken regular prednisone several times, and it definitely does like a bit of a hypomanic trick on me.
Yeah.
But that was nothing like that methylprednisone. I was like I was a complete psycho.
Yeah, it's like important for people to hear, like adding a methyl group to certain compounds, to prednisone, to for adding it to folate, it has an impact.
It
And
does.
maybe that impact is not noticeable to you, but maybe it is. Maybe you
Yeah,
have trouble sleeping, or
yeah. I worked with
Yeah.
some kids on the autism spectrum whose integrative medicine doctors had or naturopaths had put them on methylated Bs, and
Mhm.
and their mothers reported that they were not sleeping at night, they were having more behavior issues, they were much harder to manage. And
Mhm.
so going back to Ben Lynch makes his Seeking Health line has very nice a very nice range of options. So he has methyl-free options for multivitamins, for B complexes. He also has, complexes where you can get them methylated. But I really do like those for people who are sensitive. And I work with a lot of people who cannot tolerate methyls
Yeah,
in
so just for people to know, like over methylation can also be problematic.
yeah, it can
Um
cause extreme agitation, insomnia, um,
So
unpleasantness. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think like some of my takeaways would be one, get familiar with the list of potential symptoms of what it might look like if you're getting too much so
Yeah.
that you can recognize that. Focus on food first, always. um,
Yeah.
learn a little bit about cofactor nutrients to make sure that you're not just like spiking one of these nutrients in these pathways and missing out on other cofactors. Start with low doses, and the goal should always be minimum effective dose.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what else could we say is kind of a takeaway? I know there's a hypothetical concern of like could over supplementation with methylated Bs promote cancer and tumor progression. That is more of a so far in the evidence, it seems like that's more of a hypothetical concern. It doesn't appear like it would cause cancer, but there is a concern of if you have like an occult tumor or an occult cancer that you're not yet aware of, and you're mega dosing folate in
Yeah.
particular,
Yeah.
then that could
Yeah.
potentially accelerate the growth of the
Absolutely.
cancer.
Yeah.
So, if you're looking at nutritional oncology, be sure you're talking to somebody who knows their stuff. It's a completely different world of
That's a
nutrition,
was.
wild
and
west.
some
Oh
of
my
this will
God.
be
It's
it's a whole
Is
nother topic. But
and even different types of cancer and different single nutrients. Like I remember Victoria, we did some research together and looked at some of the stuff on prostate cancer and choline intake. Like
yeah.
high choline diets in people with prostate cancer can actually feed tumor growth.
Yeah.
yeah,
Choline is a great nutrient. Like we want to be very focused in on these things.
The people that I see that it really impacts, there's like a certain type of client that I would see. And I think we kind of like know this type, right? Where it's like extremely strict, never misses a dose, sticks to a protocol,
Yeah.
like to the death. Literally, it's like, hopefully it hasn't killed anybody, but like most people have almost like a natural, like kind of a protection in that they're not so strict that they're going to
For
just
sure.
take it to the limit.
Yeah.
But some people have that. I actually am friends, like Jameson Simpson has been on the podcast a few times. I mean, he
I
would be
love
the first
his
to tell you he will take it to the absolute limit, so it's like if you have that, the part of you where it's like, this is really the problem. People are sick and they're just trying to figure out like what the solutions are. And then they like see the stuff on social media and they're like, oh, well, maybe methylated bees are the answer. It's like, maybe, maybe not. Like I just pulled up the list, Amanda, of over methylation, like anxiety, because mood disorders, it can kind of make you feel like a little like obsessive, edgy, that's the list is, it's, you start to feel like it's like manic is the word that Sarah used. And I think that that's accurate, but it's like, maybe you just like experiment a little bit, and you do talk to somebody that you trust, which that's a whole other topic. Like, how do you find that person, especially, oh my God, in nutritional oncology, that is absolutely the Wild West. It's like some prudence is, it's really the best medicine. And not to get like if something seems linear, like this causes this, it's like, that's probably not right, because I got kicked off. I was trying to pull up this Roche biochemical pathway chart that you can see here. That is part of your inside. So does that look linear? No, it definitely doesn't. It's, and the takeaway, it's hard. It's like some people do benefit from methylated bees.
For sure.
They really do.
Yeah.
Some people though, they don't. Some people it's probably just like a toss up, but like, yeah, how can there be like a clear cut takeaway? I want there to be one.
Yeah, just some general ideas. And don't forget the value of homocysteine, monitoring those homocysteine levels.
Yeah. Ask your doc,
It's a
doctors are
affordable, easy add-on.
very, they won't necessarily be proactive about running homocysteine, except maybe in a cardiovascular disease patient.
Yeah.
But if you ask them, they almost always will.
Or in kidney disease, I think they do run it in
Oh,
kidney
yeah,
disease.
they do.
They keep an eye on
They
it.
do.
Yeah. It's not a cheap blood test. I want to say like even wholesale, like when I've seen it, it's like $40 or $50. Like vitamin D is like $5 or something, but it does cost a little bit more.
B6 is even more expensive. It's like $75.
Yeah, it's expensive. But yeah, as a functional, like the kind of the evidence, like, am I having issues with methylation, homocysteine? That is a good one to keep an eye on in your blood work.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I did want to say is that a lot of kids with autism spectrum disorder have a very hard time with blood draws. And so I do tend to be more careful, just because so I tend to be more conservative. So sometimes, I have one client who is an autistic little girl who really only gets blood draws if she's like under anesthesia, and then it's like, some of those values are not going to be exactly reflective of
Right.
So you have to be so cautious in these cases. You really, everything that Amanda said, especially if you or your child are not, I had one adult client who just absolutely could not do blood draws. And there were certain things that we just didn't do, that I would have maybe symptomatically, clinically imagined might be helpful. I don't want to go over like a certain safe amount of vitamin D. I don't want to, I definitely don't want to like risk people like taking in too much of B vitamins, because you can get all kinds of things, even peripheral neuropathy is associated with low homocysteine. And I don't know if the studies have effectively assessed for, potential confounders, like are the people with peripheral neuropathy taking a lot of B vitamins, which they might be, are they then lowering their homocysteine that way? But, all kinds of stuff. And even other trends, like, the belief that copper is bad, or that you shouldn't eat nuts. I mean, these things do a lot of harm. I see a lot of people having negative health impacts from very low vitamin E intakes. And you
Which
know,
is high in nuts. People
yeah,
should know. Like I think sunflower
yeah,
seeds is like the
yeah, yeah,
highest plant source.
yeah. And also, I did have a client who had neuropathy that was caused by low copper. It's very
Mhm.
unusual, very, very unusual. But we did extensive testing, and he just had low copper. Um,
Wow. Yes.
Yeah, and there's some fear mongering there about low iron toxicity
Copper. Yeah.
too that can, take women away from prenatal vitamins. A whole nother can of worms
yeah,
to go in,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
I
that would be actually a great episode is just to talk about prenatals and
and iron
why they are important for
yeah,
99.9% of people on this earth.
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah. You all,
definitely.
I think we should wrap up. We are going along. Sarah, thank you. If there's anything that you're like, hey, this is really important to post in the show notes, please send it over and I'll make sure that people get it in the show notes.
Yeah,
I hope that do you feel more clear question mark after this? At the very least, I think people will see that this is a huge discussion. And for people who have, a clinical practice, there's a lot of thought and consideration and research and like observation that goes into making this into practical recommendations. And yeah, not to turn people into just feeling afraid all the
yeah,
time. So Sarah, thank you so much
yeah.
for
Thank you both
coming
for.
back on. People don't know, but we had a snafu with our tech yesterday. So this is the second time we've met up. And Amanda, thanks for running on fumes today after being up all night with your baby.
my pleasure, Sarah. So lovely to see you, but to
Right.
hear all of your
Wisdom.
wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's knowledge, but also just wisdom. I just love how much context and mental flexibility and real lived insight you bring to the table. So,
Yeah.
Thank you
yeah,
so
thank
much.
you.
And yeah,
Thanks, guys.
thank you both.